Hey, what's going on, everybody? Today we're talking about the Dirty Harry collection from Warner Home Entertainment. Now, if I had to do a list of the top 25 best cop movies of all time, all 5 of these Dirty Harry movies would have to be up there, and probably even in the top 10. They're just that good. I like Dirty Harry. Now, my favorite cop series is the Lethal Weapon movies. In fact, I think all 4 of those are brilliant, and they're some of my favorite movies. But Dirty Harry certainly ranks up there with some of the best, including Die Hard and probably the Beverly Hills Cop series. The original Dirty Harry movie was actually written by a husband and wife team, Harry and Rita Fink, and eventually had an uncredited rewrite by John Milius, which I'll get to in a second. The script was originally written for John Wayne. Now, there's been a little bit of debate about that, but John Wayne says it was written for him and that he turned it down. Now, a couple of things might point to this actually being true. Number one, the film was optioned at Warner Brothers originally, and John Wayne had a standing production deal with them through his Batjack production company. 2, Harry and Rita actually had written a bunch of scripts for Wayne, including Big Jake and Cal Hill, U.S. Marshal, both westerns that John Wayne had done in the early part of the 70s. And there's actually some people saying that the movie had been originally written as a western itself, but was quickly changed to a cop sort of thing before it had a pin, I guess, had ever hit the page. All of that's irrelevant because John Wayne passed. He would actually regret it so much that he would make 2 of his own cop movies. McHugh, which was set in Seattle and directed by John Sturges, and Brannigan, which was primarily set in London but also Chicago, in which John Wayne would play a Dirty Harry type cop. None of them were as successful as Dirty Harry, but they allowed us to see what the film might have been like with John Wayne. They were okay, but certainly nowhere near as good. Next, they turned to Frank Sinatra, and Frank Sinatra had done a couple of these. I believe he did one called Tony Rome or Tony Roma or something like that in the late 60s, early 70s. And he had sort of liked the sort of action copy type dramas, but eventually I think he had some scheduling conflicts or something like that, and he dropped out. Enter Clint Eastwood. At the time, he had just starred in directed and starred in a movie called Play Misty for Me, which they would remake years later, basically, but not really as Fatal Attraction. It was the same basic plot. Clint Eastwood played a radio disc jockey, and this woman became obsessed with him and tried to become his wife. And when he wouldn't, she kept trying to kill him or kill herself. And I don't know. You'd have to see the movie. It's pretty good. But by no means was Clint Eastwood a bona fide megastar. He had also starred in the disaster Paint My Wagon with Lee Marvin, a musical that just did not go anywhere. Most people knew him from the TV series Rawhide and for a couple of the pictures that he did leading up to Dirty Harry. While the Man with No Name trilogy has been enormously successful over the years, at the time when it was released, it was considered an exploitive spaghetti western. And while they were popular, they weren't enormously popular enough to make him a megastar. And in fact, Dirty Harry would cement him as a uber super megastar, and he would go on to make 4 other pictures. The original Dirty Harry, like I said, actually had an uncredited rewrite by John Milius, and over the years he sort of claimed credit for some of the more loquacious things that Dirty Harry says, such as, you gotta ask yourself, do I feel lucky? Well, do you, punk? It is the way in which Dirty Harry, and particularly Clint Eastwood, delivers these lines that make them so impactful. John Milius actually is credited with coming up with a concept for his super big-ass fucking gun, the largest handgun made at that time, which has since changed, and they actually brought that up in Sudden Impact, the 4th film in the series. After the success of Dirty Harry, directed by Don Siegel, a few years later, Clint would go on to make a second Dirty Harry movie called Magnum Force, which would combine probably 2 of the most strangest writing choices for the 1970s. One is John Milius, who wrote Apocalypse Now, and he also did things for the series Rome, and the other is Michael Cimino, who wrote and directed Thunderbolt and Lightfoot that Clint Eastwood would make right after Magnum Force. He would also go on to do The Deer Hunter and a movie that I always want to call it Heaven's Day, but I believe it's called Heaven's Gate or something. Anyways, it was like one of the most disastrous pictures made, and actually almost cost him his career. Yeah, Heaven's Gate, 1980. Magnum Force is basically the story of this group of Chips-esque motorcycle cops that drive around San Francisco and bump off criminals that they think have slipped through the justice system. It's a unique film, and it's certainly one of the only ones that's not as topical, but it's notorious for its Drano sequence, in which a couple of real-life hoods actually attempted to recreate this scene after breaking into an electronics store, finding out that it's not quite as sanitary as it appears to be in the movie. Magnum Force is a unique entry into the Dirty Harry series. It's not exactly funny, but it's serious, but it's very strange. It's a very strange film all around, but unique as well. Next would be The Enforcer, which would see Dirty Harry being paired with Ty Daly from Cagney and Lacey. It would deal with feminist issues that was coming up in the late 70s, as well as issues like the Siamese Liberation Army, whatever the fuck they're called. They're the group in the 70s that kidnapped Patty Hearst and made her rob a bank or something like that, and were fodder for numerous amounts of 70s movies like Network and this one. Basically, it's Dirty Harry and Ty Daly going around San Francisco talking to, Black Panther-esque leaders and things like that. And it's very very, very 70s and very interesting. And I liked it a lot. The Enforcer is probably my favorite just for its sort of undeniably 70s-esque movie. I mean, it's almost borderline exploitation film. It's very short. I think it's probably one of the shortest in the entire series. It's awesome. And from director James Fargo. And also features John Mitchum, which was Bobbert Mitchum's brother. So there's that. It's just a really great movie, and you should all check that one out. Up next would be the only one in the series that Clint actually directed himself, which would be Sudden Impact in 1983. It was a chance to bring Dirty Harry back in a much more serious, much more sort of dark overtones. It was a movie in which Clint brought forth his girlfriend, which it seemed like, oh God, me personally, I cannot stand that bitch. I think her name is Sandra Day, or I know her first name is Sandra. Sandra Lockey. And God, she was in so many of these Clint Eastwood movies in the late 70s, early 80s. Anyway, she plays this painter who, her and her sister, who is now a sort of mute vegetable, a human vegetable, were raped by this group of sadistic beach bums when she was in college, and she returns to her hometown to bump each one of them off one by one. And because one of them has moved to San Francisco, she starts with him. And unfortunately, Dirty Harry is put on the case, and now he has to decide what he's going to do. I think this is the weakest of all the Dirty Harry movies. Clint attempts to inject a little bit of humor into the movie, and I think that part works, but the movie is just so serious that it's not as much fun. It's a little bit stylized, but overall it's not the best in the series, but I still think it works, and it's still a really good movie. And you guys should check that one out. It's very early 80s, and it has kind of a synthy type soundtrack, also provided, I believe, by Lalo Schiffer. In fact, the only one that Lalo Schiffer did not do, I believe, was The Enforcer, which was done by Jerry Fiedling or something like that, who had worked on a lot of Sam Peckinpah movies. And it's the one that suffers, I think, the most, because it feels more like a 70s cop TV show necessarily than it does a 70s movie. But Sudden Impact went back to a very cinematic aspect to it and brought back Lalo Schiffer as the scorer. Sudden Impact is a good movie. It would be quite a few years before Clint would return to the Dirty Harry franchise, and in 1988 he did a film called The Deadpool, which was basically this horror film director played by Liam Neeson has been playing this game called The Deadpool, which everybody makes a list of 8 celebrities that you think within the year are going to die, and an obsessed fan gets a hold of his copy of the Deadpool and actually starts bumping people off. There are parts in this movie where it could literally borderline on sort of self-parody, and could sort of borderline on being outright ridiculous, including a car chase which involves an RC car. But director Buddy Van Horn, who was a stunt coordinator before becoming a director, actually really did a pretty good job to make sure that the action was as believable as it possibly could, which combined an RC car chasing an actual car driven by Dirty Harry. I don't know if it's the weakest in terms of the other films. I think it's probably at least the second weakest. It's still a fun movie, which makes it just slightly more than Sudden Impact. I like Sudden Impact. I like the Deadpool, but they're probably on the lower end. The 80s were not as kind to Dirty Harry, I guess, as the 70s, but it's still a fantastic movie. All these movies are, they're all great. And whether you check them out on standard def DVD or you check them out on Blu-ray, you really should get your hands around a copy of these films, because they're absolutely worth it. Now, on Amazon, they've been selling this set for around $80 to $90. For 5 films, that's less than $20 a piece, and I don't think you're going to find that deal anywhere else. In the collection, you get a poster, some postcards, which are basically reproduction of the original theatrical poster artwork, a couple of reproduction of some memos, as well as a reproduction of Dirty Harry's badge and ID card in a laminated ID card in a cup style wallet. It also has a book that it comes with, which provides information on the film, and everything about this is awesome. Now, disc qualities sort of range from fair to fantastic. These films were shot in a specific style that were to emulate a kind of a gritty, low-budget type feel. And they were all shot with a very tight budget, and many of the main cinematographer, I believe, on the first couple of movies, really likes a lot of dark scenes, and the picture suffers most in that. Like a lot of high-def movies, the grain is just absolutely amplified. Now, there are some shots in all 5 films which just look pathetic and should not have been there, but unfortunately they are. I think Warner Brothers did a decent job with these transfers. I certainly don't feel like I was ripped off. I think they look as good as Dirty Harry possibly can, but I think that they probably could have possibly been cleaned up just a little bit more. Now, don't worry if you feel like, oh my god, I'm losing my money on this. You're not. Just the fact that you get all the supplementary material, and there's a ton of it packed onto the set, it makes it worth it. And the films look great. Don't get me wrong, they look great. They look fantastic in high definition and easily trump all the DVDs and VHSs and everything that you've ever seen of Dirty Harry, unless obviously you've seen a pristine 35mm print, which is going to trump HD no matter what. Go out, get this one. It's highly recommended. It's a great set. If you love Clint Eastwood, if you love Dirty Harry, you will not be disappointed. So check out all 5 films from Warner Home Entertainment, and it's been the Blue Review. Sorry it was kind of long, but peace.